From our studios around the world, this is the Taste of Place podcast. Each month, we share stories from the keepers of culinary culture and heritage to spark ideas for your professional path or your next travel adventure. I'm your host, Erik Wolf. Thanks for listening.
In this episode of the Taste of Place podcast, the focus turns to Ireland, not through its grand dining rooms or famous exports, but through the people who quietly shape its food culture every day. The guest is Santina Kennedy, an award-winning food consultant, producer, champion, and storyteller whose work brings Ireland's culinary heritage to life through experience, collaboration, and place-based thinking. Santina's journey spans banking, café ownership, formal study in gastronomy, and ultimately a career dedicated to interpreting Irish food history in meaningful contemporary ways. Her work highlights the makers, producers, and traditions often overlooked, from tenant farmers and kitchen workers to everyday ingredients like butter, bread, potatoes, and whiskey. This conversation explores how food can tell the real story of a place, why regional networks matter, and how Ireland's cultural identity is shaped as much by resilience and generosity as by flavor. It also touches on Irish whiskey as a lens into history, and on St. Brigid as an unexpected but powerful symbol of hospitality and food culture. Episode 84 offers a thoughtful look at how Ireland is quite literally made by its makers. This episode is sponsored by the World Food Travel Association's Taste of Place movement, a global initiative celebrating culinary culture, food heritage, and the makers behind them. Taste of Place helps travelers and consumers to connect more deeply with destinations through flavor, tradition, and place. Learn more at jointasteofplace.org.
Santina, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much, Erik. It is absolutely my pleasure and an honor, actually, to be here.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to be speaking with you as well. You have won a very prestigious award in Ireland. You have a fascinating history behind you in terms of everything that you've done for the food and beverage industry in Ireland. And I would like to start the show today talking about how the delay that you experienced in your life before you could actually get to what was passionate for you, because you had always been interested in food and drink ever since you were a little girl. You were living in an agricultural area as well with lots of great produce. And then you went into banking, and you said you really only got into food and beverage when you were entertaining at home. And I can just see the wheels turning over the years in your head thinking, gosh, I hate this. I don't want to do this anymore. So can you talk about your background and how you were eventually able to bloom into the cafe owner and everything? Because it's a great story.
Oh, you're so right. And thank you so much. You're just making me laugh. This is something I hadn't said before. But when I think about when I was a child, I used to line my dolls up and do cookery demonstrations for them and tell them where the food came from. And I still have one of those dolls, which my children think is a little odd, but there. But yeah, it's been a long time coming. And sometimes now I think, when I'm doing some of my work now, I think this is literally the job that I dreamed of when I was a child. And it didn't even exist when you're at school. At school here in Ireland, we have to make sort of career choices in our last year at school and choose our university courses based on these certain types of jobs. And the job I do now is certainly nothing like this was listed there. And I suppose working in banking in Ireland in the 1990s, there was a recession, times were tough financially, and people took secure jobs. And I certainly would have taken a career path that I thought was safe and be able to provide for myself and ultimately my family. But to say numbers and figures and straight lines didn't really suit me. I did stick for a long time, mind you, but was always interested in food. My only expression in those times where my food interests were, we used to get a menu listing for the canteen during the week, and my colleagues would come to me and ask for suggestions of what to order. So I suppose even then I was talking about it, always talking about food, always interested in food, always interested in where food came from. And slowly the jigsaw pieces were starting to come together. When you begin to travel a little bit and you realize that other countries are celebrating their food culture and society in a way that we just hadn't been doing in Ireland. But yet I was growing up in an agricultural area and I knew that the produce was good. I just didn't know where it was going. So yeah, a long and winding road. I stayed at home with my children for nearly 9 years and absolutely loved that and loved homemaking because of course you can absolutely indulge your interest in cooking, and the fridge was always full of very interesting ingredients, most of which my children did not like. So I needed another outlet for the culinary side of things. And I'd been saving for a while and had planned to open a little cafe and retail shop celebrating local Irish food when my youngest daughter went to school. And lo and behold, that time came out, and it was a financial necessity at the time as well. So I had a business plan, a small budget, and absolutely no experience. And I launched myself into the food world publicly at that stage.
And
So,
you had the cafe for what, about 8 years?
yeah, nearly 9 years as well. My career path has been in stages of 9 years. 9 years doing a job I definitely wasn't suited for. 9 years at home with my family, which I absolutely loved. And then 9 years almost running the cafe. Yeah.
Okay. And so you did end up closing the cafe, but before we move on from that concept, if there was maybe one lesson that you learned from your time running that cafe, and I'm thinking about maybe something that you'd like to tell other entrepreneurs in the industry, what would you say that lesson would be that you learned from running the cafe for 9 years?
I suppose I would have always felt that if I had more budget or if I had more experience, that it could be even better. But actually, looking back, we were within a very short space of time, very successful, won a lot of awards. The cafe was furnished with our house furniture at the start. Our bookshelves were retail shelves. Our dining table was one of the big tables. So we didn't have a huge budget, but we were still winning lots of awards and really busy. And I suppose really looking back on that, I realized it isn't about budget or experience, although those things do help. It's about commitment to provide the very best service that you can. And I think when it comes to hospitality, if that's your commitment and it comes from the heart, that cannot be faux. You can't fake that. And people pick up on that. And it becomes genuinely a place that people want to hang out and to eat and to drink and to believe your promise of what you're offering.
I love that, the commitment, but also the transparent passion, the genuine passion.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that was it was a wonderful opportunity for me to say, this is who I am and this is what I'm interested in. And if you're interested in it too, then you could hang out here. And that became, at that time, it was a physical space. And now sometimes it's a virtual space or it's a movable space. But that was the foundation stone for what I'm doing now.
Okay. And speaking of what you're doing now, what are you doing now since the cafe closed? That was 8 years ago or so. So
Yeah.
what have you been doing?
My goodness, it's been busy. And sometimes I pass that building, which is now another cafe, and I love to go in there and have a coffee. Sometimes I pass by and think, I could just go in there now and start working again. And it never leaves you. And it was a lovely time. Now I'm a food consultant, which is the job, I suppose, that I would have dreamed of. And that's just, those two words encompass so much. And I've been freelancing for the last almost 2 years. But straight after the cafe, to get myself onto this journey, I was thinking, okay, I've been working my whole adult life. I worked in a bank now 18 years ago. I don't even know those colleagues now to ask them for a reference. I was at home with my children. And then I was working for myself. So when you don't even have anyone to write a reference for you, you need to really start from scratch. And I knew that I wanted to stay in food. And I also knew that it had to be out of the operation side of things because it needed to be sustainable. And lifting heavy pots on a Sunday afternoon for the rest of my life was probably not going to be the way. And I also knew that I had things to say in the industry and not just things to do. So I needed to move on a little bit on the journey. So I took up a year-long diploma in food science, and I absolutely threw myself into it. And it has been years since I was in any kind of formal education at this stage. I really threw myself into it and surprised myself with the first class honours. I'm not going to say that I remember anything from those food science classes now, except that it was further proof that if you just apply grit, you'll get rewards. And after that, I could have gone on to do a master's in food science, but I really thought that's going to lead me to a path where I probably have a reliable income, which would have been very nice, and a sensible job and sensible working hours. But I knew that it wasn't really a fit for me. And I also discovered at the same time, there was a master's in gastronomy and food studies running in TU Dublin, and it had just started. It was in its second year. And I knew that was suitably vague, but also offered a couple of modules that, first of all, offered modules I was really interested in, like Irish food history and social approaches to wine and beverage culture. Lovely things like that, food writing, but also things like food branding and food education. And so I knew that within that, there'd be something in that course to feed and nurture my interest, while also hopefully lead me to a path where I might be able to make some work for myself and earn a living, which ultimately I have to do as well. And that was just a turning point in my life. It was just incredible. But I think the thing that it gave me most of all was the courage to find my voice in the conversation and not just be an actor in the kind of function of food and food service and food culture.
So you naturally grew into the leader you are today.
I reluctant to call myself a leader. It's lovely to think that people would be led by my example. And I certainly have shown examples of how applying food culture and food tourism initiatives can benefit people. But I also work alongside great people. So I see myself maybe as part of the movement. And there are other great people around who are leading us all.
Well, I think with your award that you received this year, the Producer's Champion, which I'd love for you to tell us about, but yeah, I think it's okay to call yourself a leader, Santina.
Thank you, Erik. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And to get back to your question, the work that I'm doing now is really taking Irish food and Irish food history and Irish food culture and applying that to commercial events, to PR experiences, to PR strategy for small producers, to look for opportunities for small producers to be on the big stage, working in coordinated collaborations between small producers and venues like, for example, the National Gallery of Ireland. And that's been one of my favourite projects to date, is to myself and an industry colleague, Blanca Valencia, and a good friend, we approached the National Gallery of Ireland and pitched to them the idea of looking at Irish art through a food and drink lens, and inviting people in to do a tour of the gallery and then have a dining experience afterwards where we would take inspiration from the paintings, and then that would include beautiful Irish produce.
Okay. So this might tie into my next question, but you have talked a lot about wanting to tell stories, not just of Ireland's grand estates, but also the tenant farmers, the workers and ordinary people, like your ancestors you talked about working on the estate in Wicklow, and the people who helped to shape those landscapes. So how do you take those overlooked or forgotten narratives and make them visible in the food experiences that you talk about today?
I think that's really vital. I absolutely love to visit a grand country estate and look at a beautiful opulent dining room and imagine the banquets on them. But when you think about the people who put that food on the table, who were working and who had learned how to cook from a very young age in those kitchens alongside a full team of domestic staff, what were they eating? What inspirations did they take home? What was their material culture like? Those stories are really untold, and they're some of my favorite stories to tell. And I think we can tell them, first of all, through the actual storytelling. This is what people were eating this time. But I think bringing those stories to life with actual table settings or representations of table settings with modern producers who have drawn on cheese making, Irish bread making, ways of preserving food, like smoking food, pickling, all of those things. There are some great people in this industry doing things to preserve that culture while also keeping their own product commercial. So what I do is take their produce and bring it into interactive experience and really try to celebrate that, because we can all imagine, even when we think about food and art, we immediately think of a table groaning with lobster and grapes and very opulent jellied cakes and all of that sort of thing. But sometimes it's about a basket of potatoes and the entire Irish population's dependence on that one staple food for so long, and the impact of that, and our love affair with it going on despite the tragic consequences of being reliant on one crop in the 1800s. And they're the stories that I really love to tell, because they're unexpected. and people overlook them. And when you start to tell them, especially to an Irish audience, people really engage, because sometimes these dishes and foods are so ubiquitous and it's so commonplace that people overlook them. And when you think about food culture, you think of something being very highbrow, and you don't think how your granny used to make butter and how now there's butter makers in Ireland making hand-baked butter in the same way.
Wow. Speaking of ubiquitous, let's talk about Irish whiskey.
Let's talk about Irish whiskey. It's always a good time to talk about Irish whiskey.
Yeah, always. You knew whiskey had to come into the conversation. I know that you do whiskey and food pairing experiences at the Powers Court. And when you do that, you're taking the terroir of the land, the history of the area, and you're telling stories about everything. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, does Irish whiskey, what does it reveal about Ireland's gastronomic identity that other drinks maybe don't?
Sure, that's a big question.
Yeah.
Yes, I've always enjoyed Irish whiskey, and I do enjoy alcohol, and I'm a moderate drinker, but I like a really nice drink. And I'm fascinated with the changes in Irish drinking culture as well that are happening at the moment. But whiskey has always been my go-to drink in a bar that I don't know, because you can always rely on, whatever else is happening behind the bar, down the path somewhere that it doesn't look like it might have the greatest drink selection. It'll always have a decent Irish whiskey. And I've always enjoyed a little drop of Irish whiskey neat. So moving on from my college experiences, one of the modules was Irish food history, applying the past. And we had to do an assignment around how to enjoy an Irish food history experience and make it potentially commercial. And because I was working in the industry at the time, I was able to do that assignment, but also bring it to life. And that was absolutely fascinating to me, to really investigate Irish whiskey's place in Irish history. And just looking at, there was a time when there was a heavy tax by the English crown on whiskey that was produced in Ireland from malted barley. And that gave rise to the Irish finding a way around paying those heavy taxes and using a mix of malted and unmalted barley in a whiskey, and producing a whiskey unique to Ireland called pot still whiskey, which I hope you have had a chance to enjoy, Eric. And if not, you'll have to make sure that happens. But I think even that story just speaks to the resilience of Irish people, how they are resourceful and will find a way. I think that's been fascinating, and it also shows how necessity is the mother of invention. Out of that sort of crisis, and being resourceful and finding a solution gave rise to a whole new place in Irish whiskey for a very special product.
Okay.
I also think people are surprised, and it's been a surprise to me and a delight to look at the different ways of making whiskey and using different ingredients. So often Irish whiskey is made from malted barley, but sometimes including grain, sometimes including oats. A grain whiskey being anything but barley, so typically corn, which is sweeter, and then oats giving a lovely creamy texture to whiskey. So again, all of that experimentation leads to very different flavor profiles. And then looking at different finishes as well, different cask finishes, importing barrels from, say, Madeira or sherry, and finishing whiskies in different woods to give completely different flavors. And what's been fascinating to me, and what I love sharing with people who are experiencing a whiskey tasting, and particularly a whiskey and food pairing, is that there are so many different styles and tastes and mouthfeels of whiskey. And I don't think that's immediately evident when you talk about whiskey. Some people will have tried whiskey and think, oh, I've tried whiskey before, that brown liquid, high in alcohol, didn't like it. Let's face it, none of us liked our first alcoholic drink, but we persisted with that. And I think if people persist a little bit with whiskey and try some different styles, they'll find one for them.
I was not aware that you could make whiskey from oats, but why not, right?
Yes, there's a thing called a technical file in Irish whiskey. So it's like a PGI, and there is a technical file with rules. So a certain amount of the whiskey has to be from barley, but then they have this, what's called a mash bill, and the mash bill will include the distillery's own recipe of their mix of barley and whatever other grain they decide to use. I don't know if you've come across Fionn O'Connor.
Yeah.
He has written a book called A Glass Apart, and he has done a very interesting project on old mash bills at Boan Distillery and has recreated some of those mash bills and brought those old whiskies to life again.
Wow. I think you and I need to do a whiskey tasting together, and I would just love to listen to you tell stories about the old ways of making whiskey and hear this one's oat and this one's corn, and just I think I could learn so much from you, and but also be entertained by your passion and love for what you, because it certainly comes through when you're talking about it.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I feel so lucky. Honestly, I think back to when I was in my 20s doing a very dull job. Did I ever think that I'd get the opportunity to share my love of Irish food and drink? And I think whiskey is just, it's the one thing that I suppose alongside maybe that very particular stout that people think of when they think of Ireland. And aren't we very lucky to have that at least one cultural food and drink signifier that says, yes, this is Ireland. And then through whiskey, you can explore so many other things. And I suppose for me, allowing people to taste Irish foods when they're having this whiskey and food pairing experience has been great. And you often have a couple who would arrive and they'd say, oh, no, I don't like whiskey. Or their partner would say, oh, I don't like salmon or trout or whatever it is we're going to be tasting. But then when they try it together with the whiskey, and the whiskey's been paired particularly to the flavors of whatever food it is, it's just lovely to see people open their minds.
Absolutely. I'm sure you could open my mind. I'm not a whiskey expert, and I think that most of the whiskeys I've tried have been Scottish or American. I did visit the Jameson distillery in Dublin, and that was a standardized experience, but I can't really say that I've had that much experience with Irish whiskey, so I better get to Ireland soon.
We need to solve that immediately. And
Yes,
yeah, the big distilleries, those big distillery experiences offer something great. They have great facilities and they can accommodate big tour groups. I do think it's nice to visit a distillery that's run by the owner or people who are very passionate about what they're doing as well, for a more boutique experience and to really get behind the nuts and bolts and to be able to ask questions and find out things that are slightly off script to get a full experience. Anyway, there's no shortage of bars in Ireland where some old boy who's sitting up there who'll give you his opinion on Irish whiskey and you'll learn as much from him with all of the nuances.
indeed, indeed. I look forward to that day. Now let's shift gears a little bit. I know that you are passionate about Saint Brigid, and that was a new one to me. So would you tell us about Saint Brigid and why you think she really resonates so deeply with Irish food culture?
I will. And I love that you've asked me that. And I also love that you've called her Saint Brigid because Brigid, as we call her, has very many pronunciations of her name. So Brigida, Brigid. In Ireland, there's lots of girls called Breed and Brigid and Biddy and Bridie and lots of derivatives of her name. I've always been fascinated with St. Brigid. I think because my granny was a Brigid and she was very hospitable and very much the centre of her kitchen and her kitchen table. But Brigid was a saint whose feast day is celebrated on the 1st of February. And that's also the season of Imbolc in Ireland. And Imbolc, if you haven't heard of that before, is one of the 4 Celtic seasons. So Imbolc meaning typically spring, Tuna meaning there's the start of summer, Lunasa is the start of the harvest, and then Samhain, which we're in now, is the winter time. So Imbolc was a time, the word literally means in the belly, and it means actually in the sheep's belly, so lambing season. And during Celtic times, Brigid was a goddess, and this was her feast day. And then as Ireland became a Christian country, Brigid suddenly became, she was no longer the goddess Brigid, she was now Saint Brigid. We do love to celebrate all of her facets as a goddess. She was goddess of poetry and healing and fire. And then as a saint, she was a matron saint or patron saint of dairy, brewing. She brewed a lake of water into a lake of beer. That's
That's
something very
a
fun.
great talent to have.
It is, yeah, that she's somebody worth celebrating. But she also of patron saint of fishermen and then also people who lived on the fringe of society. Like she was looked after women who maybe were pregnant outside of marriage, or she looked after prisoners. So she was very much a woman for the margins of society as well. And she was known for her hospitality and for generosity. So one of her miracles was that she gave all the family's bacon away to a passing stranger who was very poor and needed it for their family. And she was worried about what her stepmother would say. And when she opened the larder was full of bacon again. So she's almost like the magic porridge pot, but she had the replenishing bacon larder. So who wouldn't want that? But I think just really her spirit of generosity is the thing that she is becoming more known for. And in Ireland, growing up, we would always have been aware of St. Brigid, but she wasn't really celebrated like St. Patrick. And I and many others were a little bit peeved about this because, first of all, she's a woman and we felt that's why Brigid's not being recognised. But secondly, she had so many facets. And for me, so many connections to food and drink. I felt like she is the original ambassador for Irish food and drink. And this is a wasted opportunity. So as soon as I became involved in hosting food and drink events, I said, we're missing something here by not hosting something to celebrate St. Brigid. And thankfully, maybe I just said it so often that the people working with me just said, oh, go on then. So I started to host some events just before the new bank holiday was announced. So we got in there quickly and made our mark with the Celebrating St. Brigid's Day event. And now every year I host a variety of events, from fancy hotel dinners with the food of St. Brigid and her little cross iced upon the desserts or etched into the beautiful sourdough rolls. Also to like hosting markets where people are tasting great Irish dairy, great Irish beer, great Irish fish, to online events. And I really just want to grow that because I feel very passionate about St. Brigid herself being celebrated, but also that connection between Irish food and culture. We've held some lovely poetry events and brought some female poets who are writing poetry about food. But there's been beautiful people doing sound baths, people doing very creative silversmithing. So that all ties into Brigid as a goddess and an inspirer of people working with silversmithing, with fire, poetry, healing, and the kinds of healing that we find in nature. So yeah, there's lots to talk about. There's an endless possibilities of events around Brigid.
That's fascinating. You don't often find a god or goddess of hospitality. Of course, in ancient Rome, you've got the god of wine and parties, and we don't need to go there. But yeah, I like that. That's a great story. And I think you're right. She does sound like the original patron or matron of food and drink in Ireland. Let's keep focusing on that. I like that one. Let that evolve. I love it.
Absolutely. And I think one of my favorite things is how it's been evolving, and certainly my focus on the events that I've been holding. But events are happening all around the country now, and it's just really brilliant to see it. But what I really love is that sometimes when we celebrate St. Patrick's Day, we're dumbing down the Irish food and drink story. Whereas I really feel with Brigid, we're elevating it.
Yeah.
And that's why I really want those events to be a success.
I think you're right. With St. Patrick's Day, it's all about the green beer, and that's it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Not the thing that makes us proud to be Irish. Yeah.
No,
sure.
It's not. Let's shift focus back to where you're from, County Wicklow, and the county level food network that you have there. What do you think makes that successful? And what do you think that these kinds of small local networks need to avoid to really help their local producers succeed?
Oh, that's a great question, Eric. I wish we had a much more public platform for you to ask that question because it's so important. So to get to your first part of your question, I was overjoyed when I found that Wicklow was finally going to have a food network, because when I had my shop, I really felt that I needed a kind of county-wide support for the kind of things that I was doing, which was really focusing on local producers and giving them retail space and space on the menu. And I sometimes felt like a little bit of an outlier doing that. So to have a network where that kind of activity might be supported with other hospitality businesses was really great. And it was actually just during COVID when that kicked off, just before COVID. And I was still in college and I said, I'd love to get involved. I'd love to volunteer and help. So I started doing some writing for the website. But very quickly, the consultancy who had been given the tender to run this new network and to get it up and running, they were from the north of Ireland and they couldn't travel during COVID. So the volunteers, myself and two colleagues, Tyke Byrne and Paul Smith, became the coordinators on site and led by the consultancy, of course. So we were really very quickly immersed in what it would mean to run a food network. And I think because the three of us were based in industry rather than people based in a consultancy looking in, we were on the ground and we were already very knowledgeable. The three of us are from Wicklow, very knowledgeable about the food producers and about the venues who might support them. So that I think timing has been a huge part of the success of that. I think if people who weren't really passionate about this succeeding didn't have that moment in time during COVID where we had time to actively give to it and kickstart it, I think maybe it wouldn't have started with the same momentum. And through that, we just met so many fantastic producers, and Wicklow has a really thriving food scene. And I think partly because it's just south of Dublin, so the market is there, the commercial market is there, but Wicklow is known as the Garden of Ireland, partly because so much beautiful produce grows there. So it's got the variety, it's got beautiful coastal farms where you've got lamb and dairy farms. That's got that sea breezes washing it over pasture to give great flavour. In the mountains then, it's very rugged. And then on the west of the county, it's beautiful pasture, beautiful scenery, and one of the best cheesemakers in Ireland, actually. Not only in Ireland, he's been voted best in the world. His cheddar has been voted best cheddar in the world at the World Cheese Awards. So Latin cheddar. And he's just a poster boy for a fantastic organisation. I'm very proud to work with the producers in Wicklow. And we've very often held events, including one at Dublin Castle, where we have put on an entire menu of food and drink from Wicklow and not needed to move outside the county for anything. Now, okay, where we're serving coffee, it's coffee roasted in Wicklow. It's not grown in Wicklow. The wines we have are raspberry, blackberry and strawberry wines from a company called Wicklow A Wines. And they're using Irish fruit to create those wines, no grapes. So it's just been, for me, very exciting. And I suppose the success of that network has come from that unique opportunity where people who were totally invested in this working, having the opportunity to get involved and bring others along with them.
Okay, so I have to ask, because we've done a lot of work with Boyne Valley, how is Wicklow different from Boyne Valley in terms of the produce or what is grown or produced in the area?
Yeah, and I absolutely love Boyne Valley, and I really love what they're doing. And they're a couple of years ahead of Wicklow in terms of running their experiences and celebrating their producers. I think the thing that Wicklow has is the absolute abundance of variety. So Boyne Valley, like every county in Ireland, and I work with a lot of networks around Ireland now as well, has really great produce. But I think the thing in Wicklow is that we can actually, in fact, we could put on a weekend menu using only Wicklow produce and not need to dip outside of Wicklow for anything else. It's the fact that we've got, even focusing on the alcohol, we've got beer, we've got whiskey, we've got gin, we've got wine, we've got non-alcoholic producers, apple juice, elderflower cordials, kefirs, Wicklow grown raspberries in kombuchas. And even on the drinks table alone, the sheer abundance and variety of produce. So it's not that they're different. I suppose what's happened in Wicklow is there's just so many more of the producers in a similar sized county. And I certainly, I have to say, although my work is with Wicklow, that's because that's where I happen to live and work. What I really want to happen is that the whole of Ireland food networks join together, and not join together permanently, but work together to celebrate Ireland's food culture. And not just, it's not a competition. Of course, Wicklow would win, but it's not a competition. It's let's elevate the entire food culture of the entire island and to celebrate regionality, but also raise the bar for everybody.
Yeah, you're right. It's not a competition. There is a lot of great food and drink all throughout the country. And I think back to the food champions that were put together by Fellowship Ireland a few years ago.
That's right.
And I always was sad that program folded, although I guess there's still some food ambassadors around.
There are, and the program itself may not be continuing the same way that it was. Those guys, I know them well. I meet them regularly. They are so committed to championing Irish food and to the success of Irish food tourism and to the celebration of what's on the Irish plate. And I know they still meet regularly, and I hope a time comes when they're supported properly again. because the work they have done and continue to do individually is absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a great program. And in fact, it was really best practices in the world of gastronomy tourism because there's not that many countries that have that kind of phenomena available. And to have a country that's a manageable size, you could drive from one end to the other in not that much amount of time. But
You
we're not
can.
talking Brazil size or Russia size
Yeah.
country. And to have representation equally placed throughout the country and some passionate people as well. And it was a fantastic program. I really was sad to see it go, but I think that passion is still there. Like you said, they're still meeting, but there's people like you, people like the ones I know in Boyne Valley, other people throughout the country that are still, you have so much great produce, great products, great stories to tell, great history. You're a great gastronomy destination.
I couldn't agree more, Eric. I agree. And I suppose the thing is now, how do we tell the story? And one of the things I suppose that worries me a little bit sometimes is that we all work in this together and we all, I'm sure you're the same, the work life boundaries are blurred.
Yeah.
And when it's food and drink, it's something you're doing every day. You can't help but consider your job every time you're eating or drinking. And my poor friends certainly hear a lot about my job when they just go out for dinner, whether they want to or not. So I think the passion is always going to be there. And however, I do think that sometimes because we're in this community of people who always talk about food, that sometimes we might be in an echo chamber. And if I was to step outside my immediate family and name a certain ingredient or name an experience or discuss Irish food, that people would be a little bit perplexed. And sometimes I think that we really need to start telling our food story at home first, so that the people who live here will be proud advocates for Irish food as much as we are telling the intermediaries who are maybe telling it to tourists. Because tourists can often come here with an expectation of Irish food that's rightly elevated. And, they may be looking for something that people who live here aren't really giving enough credit to yet.
Yeah.
That makes
You're
sense.
absolutely right to start with the youth and the educating the youth and in the schools and also in the families so that people don't grow up thinking that a takeaway pizza is Irish
Exactly.
food, right?
Exactly.
And yeah, it's going to take 30 years to, I don't want to say indoctrinate, but to
Yeah.
influence the youth in the right way. But that is absolutely the right approach, is the long, slow, strategic approach to regaining and reclaiming the glory of the Irish food culture.
Yeah, I absolutely, I really do think so, that we need to get everybody as proud of Irish food as they are of maybe Irish Gaelic games or Irish music, to really recognize that we have something special here and that we can stand alongside some of the great gastronomy nations of the world, because the produce is certainly here, and that any of the international chefs who have come here have been astounded by the produce. So it would be just wonderful to see that everybody else appreciates that. One of my favorite times was, again, during COVID, when the country had opened up a little bit, but it was only domestic tourists that we had experiencing our food tours and coming to do food pairings and food tastings. And to see them enjoying Irish food with new eyes and a new appreciation was just really heartwarming.
That is actually the silver lining in the cloud of the pandemic, and we see that in a lot of countries that people got to know their own food culture again.
Yeah,
And I think it actually boosted the gastronomy tourism industry somehow, in that people haven't really forgotten that it's enhanced their interest in the history, the backstory, the faces behind the places, and also getting out into rural areas. People are much more interested now than they were 10 years ago in getting out of the over touristed destinations like the Barcelonas, the Amsterdams, the Londons of the world, and getting out into the secondary and tertiary, yes, the Boyne Valley, the County Wicklow, County Cork kind of places, and just meeting the people. And I think that what disappoints people sometimes is when they go to those places and they don't hear, say, the Irish accents, because
exactly.
how much do we
Of
love the
course.
Irish accent? I could the Irish accents and the Caribbean accents, I could just listen to them all day long. It's like the sing song to it. I just love it. But gosh, yeah,
That's
when you go
lovely.
somewhere and you don't hear the Irish accent, it's sad.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think that's part of that. First of all, we have to give such thanks to the people who do work in our hospitality industry and have come here from other places, because they've very quickly, so many of them have quickly embodied the true sense of Irish hospitality and are doing such an amazing job passing that on, that Irish welcome. But of course, it would be lovely to see more Irish people re-entering or entering the hospitality industry. And again, COVID, I think, showed people a different side to maybe working those long hours, and people maybe wanted a better work-life balance. And that was something that they saw during COVID. But I also think that businesses have started to look at those work-life balances themselves and maybe close for a few days a week rather than opening all week or just closing on one day, and giving people the opportunity to live in their communities, to earn a decent wage, and maybe not to have to work to the middle of the night, 6 or 7 nights a week. And I'm thinking, for example, Nevin Maguire, who I'm sure he's got a wonderful restaurant and cookery school. He was also a previous Blossom Heron champion, but he's a TV chef here, but he has a beautiful restaurant that has a very long waiting list, and he really celebrates Irish produce on it. But he's in a very rural village towards the north of Ireland, near the border. And I think he's got a really strong local cohort on his employment list. But he opens his restaurant not every day of the week and gives people an opportunity to enjoy family life in their own town, as well as having a lovely job in a lovely restaurant. So I think what we need to see is hospitality working a little bit to make those jobs possible for people and to make it something very attractive.
And also, we have something to look forward to, because when those immigrants then create families and have children, and their children grow up in the Irish culture, speaking with the Irish accent, then they're Irish. So we have that to look forward to another 20 or 30 years.
We do. And also the recipes, because Ireland is an island nation, and the recipes that we have all come from other places and other people. So everybody who's arriving now are bringing really exciting recipes, introducing new ingredients, new ways of cooking. So yeah, I've got a lot of friends of the international community who have made their mark in a very short time on the Irish food scene, for the better. But yeah, it is also lovely to hear a lovely Irish lilt and an Irish welcome when you go in somewhere. So I hope we find the balance with that, and just great appreciation for the people who have come here to work in hospitality, but also for those who stick it out and who want to stay, offering that Irish welcome.
Yeah. It is nice when someone from a different culture can bring something like a different spice, or a different way to cook something like rice, right?
Right.
Or different ways of cutting vegetables, or whatever it is that they bring with them, that I think adds value and dimension to cuisine. And it was our mutual friend John Mulcahy that said every 80 years a cuisine changes. And so the food that we're eating today is not what our grandparents ate, because it's changed. And you're getting immigrants from certain countries, other countries are getting immigrants from different countries, and it is changing cuisine. But like you said, I think for the better. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we take an Irish stew and then we add some, what's that Moroccan spice? Razal, what's that,
Oh,
something?
Ras Al Hanosh.
Yeah, exactly. And what if we took an Irish stew and added a little bit of that spice into it? Now, I'm sure there's Irish people listening saying, "Oh my God, no, you can't do that." But what if we did? What if we added that kind of Arabic flavoring in? That might be interesting.
I just love to see those plays on food. And look, there's certain dishes that we can't mess with. And I think most of those dishes are actually maybe international dishes more than Irish dishes. My good friend Manuela Spinelli, she runs Eurotalks, which is an organization that I'm
I
not
know
sure if you're aware
Eurotalk,
of here, but it
yes.
really preserves food culture. She's written a piece recently, I think it was for the Irish Times, about carbonara and what Irish people were doing to it. So I think there's some recipes that we need to respect and leave alone and not touch. But certainly for a midweek family meal, I think it's really nice to be able to bring in some new flavors and try something different. And one of the things that I really love to do is take an international dish and make it with Irish ingredients, or an international
That's nice.
idea. A couple of years ago, I was lucky enough to visit Bilbao with Tourism Ireland to talk about Irish food and drink experiences. But while I was there, I absolutely fell in love with the pincho culture there. Just thought it was wonderful.
Yes.
And thought, I really want to do something like that in Ireland. I wish Ireland had pincho bars. Now, I haven't got back quite that far yet, but I did do a couple of pop-ups where we had an Irish version. So the Irish word for a little pinch is a pincheen. So we had a little pinch, a pincheen,
Oh,
and they were little stacks of Irish food made with Irish ingredients, but in that pincho style,
I love it.
served with Irish drinks. And that's something I'll definitely be giving more attention to. My
Definitely, yeah.
favorite was, I don't know if you've come across box tea.
That
So,
rings a bell. Yes.
mm,
Remind me
so
again what it is.
So box tea is one of Ireland's traditional regional dishes, and it's typically from the northwest of the country. And it is a potato cake with mashed and grated potato in it, so it's got a little bit of texture. The word they think comes from buch tea, which means poorhouse, and it's something that people would have eaten during the famine and during difficult times, and it would just have been made to make the potato stretch a bit further. But it's very popular now in the northwest of Ireland, say, as a breakfast dish, like a little potato cake. So one of the little pinchos that we made was a little piece of fox tea, topped with a little piece of black pudding, topped with a tiny piece of charcuterie, which is Irish charcuterie, but that looks like a little smoked piece of bacon. And then on top of that, a tiny quail egg. So it was like a mini full Irish in a mouthful. And those kind of things, you can just be so playful and have so much
Yeah.
fun using really quality ingredients and giving people a dining experience that is more than a dinner.
I'll leave the cooking and the recipe crafting to you, and I promise I won't try to sneak Moroccan spice into the Irish stew.
That might be a step too far.
Perhaps, yes, indeed, indeed. Santina, we need to wrap up for the day, but it was really a pleasure chatting with you, and I look forward to meeting you in person when I get to Ireland next and doing everything we talked about. You're clearly a fascinating person, and I hope that the ideas and suggestions and passion that you've shared today are things that our listeners can benefit from. So thank you again for your time.
Eric, thank you so much. And if I could just say a very special thank you for the podcast itself and all of the work that you've done, because during the time when I was starting to put shape on my work and calling it food tourism, I found your website, I found your podcast, and they gave me the words to articulate the ideas that I needed to present to people. So
Wow.
really need to thank you for that and all the work you've been doing. It's been a
It's what we
pleasure to
do
be
here
on
at the
today.
association. So thank you. Thank you for those kind words. It's very nice of you, Santina.
Thanks so much, and chat soon.
That's it for this episode of the Taste of Place podcast. This episode is brought to you by the World Food Travel Association and its Taste of Place movement. We'd like to hear from you. We invite you to share your ideas, questions, and thoughts about the podcast by contacting us through our website. Or you can connect with us and comment about the show on major social media platforms. Special thanks to our guest, Santina Kennedy. And our sincerest thanks to you for joining us. We wish you a safe, happy, and productive month ahead.